The private dining room of Pemberton's went completely still. Cole Stratton's fingers closed around Prue Langley's wrist, hard, the kind of grip that left marks the next morning, and he leaned down into her face with the particular brand of quiet fury that she had learned to dread more than shouting. "You're going to walk out of this restaurant right now," he said, his voice low and controlled. "And when we get home, you will explain to me why I had to hear from Garrett Williams that my girlfriend made a scene during his firm's private event. Do you understand me, Prue? When we get home." He didn't see the man in the corner of the room set down his whiskey glass. The man who, 40 minutes earlier, had stepped off the elevator and found his 78-year-old grandmother alive and lucid, gripping the hand of a young waitress in a wine-stained uniform, who was talking to her in a steady, unhurried voice about nothing in particular. The weather, a good book, the way Boston looked from the harbor in October, just to keep her calm until the paramedics arrived. That man's name was Renzo Cahill, and in Boston, there were very few names that carried more weight than his. Pemberton's on Commonwealth Avenue had been a Boston institution for 40 years. Dark wood paneling, white tablecloths, a wine list that took 20 minutes to read, and a clientele that included every old money family in the Back Bay. It was the kind of place where conversations happened that never made it into the newspapers, where deals were sealed over single malt, and where the staff learned quickly to see without watching. Prue Langley had worked the floor at Pemberton's for 3 years. She was 23, 5'4" in her black work flats, and possessed of the particular ability to move through a crowded dining room without disturbing the air around her. She was not invisible, she was efficient. There was a difference, though she had stopped expecting most people to notice it. She had taken the job at 20, immediately after her mother died, and her younger brother Kit's medical bills had started arriving in envelopes she couldn't bring herself to open for the first 2 weeks. Kit was 17 now, lanky and sharp-tongued, managing his type 1 diabetes with the practiced nonchalance of someone who had been doing it his whole life. What he couldn't manage, what he was far too young to manage alone, were the quarterly appointments with Dr. Pauline Vasquez at the endocrinology clinic on Tremont Street, whose specialized protocol had kept his complications from becoming something permanent and irreversible. Those appointments cost money Prue did not have, which was how Cole Stratton had become a fixture in her life 18 months ago. He had been charming at first. They always were, she had learned. Cole was 37, a senior partner at Stratton & Graves, impeccably dressed in the way that men who grew up with money wore their clothes, like the clothes were merely obligated to fit correctly. He had met Prue at a charity auction that Pemberton's had catered, and he had smiled at her in a way that suggested she was the only person in the room worth looking at. She had believed it for a while. The control came gradually, the way a tide comes in. So slowly you don't realize you've been cut off from the shore until you're already surrounded. Small comments about her clothes, the way he spoke over her in rooms full of people, the insistence that her coworkers were beneath her, the suggestion that her ambitions, she had been 2 semesters from finishing her business degree, were taking time away from what mattered to Cole, that was. And then, 9 months ago, he had taken Kit's medical file from the kitchen counter while she was in the shower and made a phone call she didn't know about. A week later, he had told her quietly, with the particular softness of someone who knows exactly how sharp the knife is, that he had purchased the outstanding debt from Dr. Vasquez's billing office. All of it. 18 months of appointments, specialist consultations, quarterly labs. "I was trying to help," he had said, with that smile. "I thought it would be easier for you if it all went through me. Less stress." When Prue had tried to leave him 2 months later, he had sat her down at his kitchen table and explained, with the measured cadence of a man who argued for a living, that if she walked out, he would call the full balance due within 30 days. She had stayed. Tonight was supposed to be a high-volume private event, a corporate dinner for a financial consulting group that had booked Pemberton's 3rd-floor suite. 40 guests, 3 courses, an open bar running until 11. Prue had picked up the shift because the money was good, and because Saturdays in the private suite always meant sizable tips from men who ordered the most expensive bottle on the list to demonstrate they could. She had not expected the woman at table 9. The older woman had been seated with 3 others, a group that had arrived early and settled into the corner table near the window with the quiet ease of people, accustomed to being given the best seat in any room. She was perhaps 78, white hair pinned neatly at the base of her neck, with sharp green eyes that had tracked Prue with approval when she described the evening's menu from memory without consulting her notepad. "You have a good mind," the woman had said. Not a compliment designed to be charming, simply an observation, delivered the way someone delivers a fact. Prue had been halfway through her second table service when she noticed the change. The woman's color was wrong. Not pale exactly, but grayish, the particular undertone she had learned to recognize from years of watching Kit during the early complications, when his blood sugar would drop and his face would shift in that specific, frightening way before he knew it himself. The woman was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, and her breathing was too shallow, too careful, like she was trying not to let anyone notice. Prue set her tray on the service station and walked directly to the table. "Ma'am." She crouched beside the woman's chair, dropping her voice low enough that the other guests didn't immediately alarm. "I need you to look at me. Can you do that?" The woman looked at her. Her eyes were still sharp, still present. "Good." "My chest," the woman said very quietly. "It feels strange." "Okay." Prue had already reached for the woman's hand, pressing 2 fingers gently to her wrist. The pulse was there but irregular, a faint stutter in the rhythm. "I'm going to get someone to call an ambulance, and I'm going to stay right here with you until they come. Don't try to stand, just breathe slowly. Can you tell me your name?" "Bridget," the woman said. "Bridget Cahill." "Okay, Bridget, my name is Prue. You're going to be fine." Whether that was entirely true or not, she said it with enough conviction that Bridget's grip on the tablecloth loosened slightly. And so Prue talked. About October in Boston, about the harbor, about a book she'd been reading, about the restoration of Victorian houses in the South End. And she held Bridget Cahill's hand, and she did not let the fear she felt show anywhere on her face. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. She did not know, while she was doing it, that the tall man who stepped off the elevator just as the paramedics were loading Bridget onto the gurney had heard every word through the cracked open door. She did not know he had stood in the hallway for a long moment before entering, watching her. She did not know yet who Renzo Cahill was. Before we get to what happened next, and what happened next will have your jaw on the floor. If this kind of story lands somewhere real for you, tap that like button, subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library, and drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Prue's position, because I promise you, Cole Stratton hadn't even gotten started yet. Cole arrived at Pemberton's at 9:40. He had come straight from his firm's happy hour on Boylston, and he carried with him the particular aggressive energy of a man who had been drinking expensive whiskey and telling himself he was the most important person in every room he entered. He pushed past the host's stand without stopping, scanning the lobby until he spotted Prue near the elevator bank, speaking with one of the paramedics. She was still in her uniform, a wine stain on the sleeve, from where she'd brushed against a glass in the chaos of the evening, her hair starting to slip from its bun. She looked shaken and steady at the same time, not dramatic, just present. Cole did not see that. Cole saw a problem. "What is going on?" He did not phrase it as a question. He walked toward her and took her by the arm above the elbow, steering her away from the paramedic mid-sentence. "I heard there was an incident up here. Do you have any idea whose table that was?" Prue looked up at him. "There was a woman having a cardiac episode. I helped her. That's what happened." "That is not your job." He gripped her arm tighter, pulling her another step toward the exit. "Your job is to serve the food and not create situations that blow back on my clients. Garrett Williams was at that event. Do you understand what that means? He's been a target account for 18 months, and I need him comfortable, not distracted by whatever mess you decided to involve yourself in." "I need you to let go of my arm," Prue said. "We're leaving." "Cole." His hand moved from her arm to her hair, a grip low at the base of her bun, the kind that looked, if you weren't watching closely, like he was simply placing his hand near her head. She went very still. She had learned that stillness was the fastest way to make him let go in public. She had become very good at stillness. "We are going to leave this restaurant right now," Cole said, his mouth close to her ear, voice pitched beneath the ambient noise of the lobby. "And when we get home, you are going to explain to me why you thought any of this was appropriate. And if you have embarrassed me in front of Garrett Williams, Prue, I promise you that you will not enjoy the conversation we're going to have." A man stepped out of the corridor to their left. He didn't appear in a hurry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked into the space between Cole and the exit, with the unhurried, absolute confidence of someone who has never in his adult life wondered whether a room would accommodate him. Renzo Cahill was 6'2", with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples, and a face that communicated something different in person than photographs suggested, something quieter and considerably more dangerous. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, and he was holding a glass of water that he set on the host's stand with careful precision before turning his full attention to Cole Stratton. He looked at Cole the way a man looks at a minor inconvenience he has already decided how to resolve. "Take your hand off her," Renzo said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Cole turned. The expression that crossed his face was one Prue recognized, the flash of territorial fury from a man who believed every intervention was a challenge to be won. He looked Renzo up and down with the particular assessment of someone who had spent his career reading rooms and calculating leverage. He calculated wrong. "This is a private matter," Cole said, with the clipped authority of someone accustomed to having that sentence end conversations. "You need to walk away." "I don't, actually." Renzo's dark eyes dropped briefly to the grip Cole still had on Prue's hair, then came back up. There was no heat in his expression. There was something considerably worse than heat. "I'll say it once more. Let go of her." Cole released Prue's hair and pointed at Renzo instead, a stiff, practiced courtroom gesture. "Do you know who I am? Senior partner at Stratton and Graves. I have 3 federal judges' personal clerks on speed dial and a libel attorney on retainer. You lay a hand on me and I will bury you in civil litigation before the end of the month." Renzo's expression did not shift. He turned his head very slightly toward the broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket who had materialized near the coat check. A second man had appeared near the elevator. Neither of them moved quickly. Neither of them needed to. "My grandmother," Renzo said, his voice dropping to a register that somehow carried further than his normal tone, "was at that table tonight. She had an arrhythmia episode. The person who knelt beside her, held her hand, and kept her calm until the paramedics arrived was this woman." He let that sit in the air. "You've had your hand in her hair twice in the last 2 minutes," Renzo continued, "and you've threatened her in a public corridor. I don't particularly care about your billing rate." A pause. "My name is Renzo Cahill." The name hit Cole Stratton like a wave he hadn't seen coming. The color left his face in stages, the cheeks first, then the jaw, then the neck. Even in the insulated, self-referential world of Boston's high-end legal community, the name Cahill carried the kind of weight that cut through pretension like a blade through paper. Cole had filed motions in front of judges who went pale when that name came up in discovery. Cole opened his mouth, he closed it. He took one deliberate step backward. "I think," Renzo said pleasantly, "that you should leave." The 2 men near the coat check and the elevator stepped forward, not aggressively, just present, positioned in a way that made the available exit options clear. Cole Stratton left through the side door. He did not look back. Renzo turned to Prue. She was standing with one hand pressed flat to her sternum, like she was physically holding herself together. Her eyes were dry. She had trained the reflex out of herself a long time ago. "Come sit down," Renzo said. "You've had a night." They sat in the private room upstairs, empty of guests now, the white tablecloth still immaculate and untouched. Renzo's man, a lean, watchful man named Rafferty, who spoke in short, complete sentences and seemed to communicate everything else with his eyebrows, brought 2 cups of coffee and then stationed himself near the door without being asked. Prue wrapped both hands around her cup and was quiet for a moment. Renzo did not fill the silence, he simply waited. "She's going to be okay," Prue said finally. "Bridget." The paramedic said the arrhythmia was caught early. If she'd gone another 20 minutes without someone noticing, she stopped. "I know." Renzo looked at her steadily. "You didn't let that happen. I've seen it before. My brother has complications with his diabetes. I know what it looks like when someone's body is doing something wrong." She looked up. "I wasn't trying to interfere with your family's evening. I couldn't not act." "No," Renzo said, "you couldn't. That much is clear." A beat of quiet. "The man," Renzo said, "not a question." Prue set her coffee cup down with precision. "My boyfriend. He puts his hands on you regularly." It wasn't phrased as a question either. She held herself with the particular compressed stillness of someone who had learned to take up less space in their own body, and Renzo Cahill had spent enough of his life reading people to understand exactly what that meant. "He has something I need," Prue said. "Flat, factual. My brother's medical debt. He purchased it 9 months ago. If I leave him, he calls it due within 30 days. Kit needs his specialist. I can't risk his treatment." Renzo said nothing for a moment. He looked at the surface of his coffee. Then he said, "Tell me the name of the specialist." "What?" "Your brother's doctor. Tell me the name." Prue looked at him with the particular expression of someone who had stopped allowing herself to believe that other people could solve problems. "Why?" "Because my grandmother is in an ambulance right now instead of a morgue because of what you did tonight," Renzo said, and his voice was very quiet. "And I don't let debts go unpaid." He met her eyes without moving. "Tell me the name." She told him. Cole Stratton, sitting in his car in the parking garage beneath Pemberton's, made 4 phone calls in 20 minutes. The first was to his assistant, instructing her to have everything publicly available on Renzo Cahill on his desk by Monday morning. The second was to the billing director at Dr. Vasquez's clinic, informing her that he would be triggering the debt repayment clause on the Langley account effective immediately. The third was to a private investigator he had used before for opposition research on difficult opposing counsel. The fourth, and the call that would ultimately dismantle him entirely, was to a former law school colleague who had moved into federal regulatory consulting. A man Cole believed could help him build a legal framework to make Renzo Cahill's business operations complicated enough to serve as a useful deterrent. What Cole did not know was that his law school colleague had been quietly cooperating with an FBI white-collar task force for the better part of a year, and that task force had been monitoring the financial practices of Stratton and Graves for considerably longer than that. Rafferty brought Renzo the intercepted summary of Cole's calls at 11:15, while arrangements were being made for Prue's brother Kit to be picked up from their apartment in Alston and brought somewhere safe. Renzo read the transcript. He set it down on the table without expression. "He called Whitmore," Rafferty said. "I heard." Renzo turned toward the window. The rain had started on Commonwealth Avenue, slicking the cobblestones. "Is Whitmore still cooperating with the field office on Berkeley Street?" "As of this Wednesday." Then Cole Stratton just handed the FBI something they've been waiting for. Renzo picked up his jacket from the chair back. "Pull the full partnership records for Stratton and Graves. There's a malpractice exposure they've been managing quietly, an estate case from 2 years back, beneficiaries who signed documents they shouldn't have. Find the file. Document it thoroughly. Send everything to the State Bar's Ethics Division and to the senior editor on the Globe's investigative desk before Monday morning." Rafferty made a note. "And the debt," Renzo added, "the Langley account from Dr. Vasquez's clinic. Purchase it by end of business Monday, then zero the balance." "The full amount?" "All of it." Renzo pulled on his jacket and called Dean Alderson at Mass General. "Tell him I'm making good on the Endocrinology Fellowship Fund commitment. In exchange, I want a confirmed specialist slot open for a patient named Kit Langley within the week, full care team." The next 4 days were unlike anything Prue Langley had experienced in her adult life. Renzo had arranged for her and Kit to stay in a brownstone on Marlborough Street that belonged. Kit determined through approximately 40 minutes of intense online investigation to a holding company with no traceable public ownership. The brownstone had high ceilings, a fireplace that worked, and a refrigerator that someone had stocked with real food, not the decorative items Cole had kept in his apartment, arranged to demonstrate taste rather than to be eaten. Kit, whose threat radar had been calibrated by years of watching Prue navigate Cole, did not ask many questions about the brownstone. He played video games in the second-floor sitting room, and on the second evening introduced himself to Renzo when Renzo arrived by saying, without preamble, "You're the mob guy. Prue said you weren't that scary." "She was being diplomatic," Renzo said. "Yeah, she does that." Kit assessed him with the frank consideration of a 17-year-old who had learned early that adults were not always what they presented. "Did you actually fix it? The Cole situation?" "Working on it." Kit nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and went back to his game. On the third morning, Prue came downstairs at 7 and found Renzo standing at the kitchen window with black coffee, watching the street in the gray early light. A stray cat, gray, with the sovereign posture of an animal that had made a studied decision about its own dignity, was sitting on the exterior sill. Renzo had opened the window 3 inches and placed a small dish of water on the interior edge, with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who simply sees what needs doing and does it. "She comes every morning," he said, without turning, knowing Prue had come in. "I haven't figured out whose she is." "Maybe nobody's," Prue said. He glanced over his shoulder. Something in his face shifted, briefly, the controlled surface of it softening at the edges. "Maybe." She sat at the kitchen table and watched him refill his coffee, and thought about the fact that this was the first morning in 18 months she had woken up without calculating whether Cole was in a good mood before she got out of bed. On the 4th morning, he sat across from her and told her everything. Prue listened without interrupting. She held her coffee cup and let him lay it out. The bar complaint, filed with the State Ethics Board, the estate case exposure, the referral to the Globe's investigative desk, the FBI's significant interest in Cole's call to his federal contact, the probable outcomes of each thread as it unraveled. "He was asked to resign from the firm at 8 this morning," Renzo said, with the flat precision of someone delivering confirmed facts. The partners voted unanimously. Federal agents will execute a search warrant at his apartment by noon. The preliminary charges include obstruction of justice and, because of the specific nature of the call he made and what he offered to provide, conspiracy to interfere with an ongoing federal investigation. He paused. "Cole Stratton will not practice law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts again." Prue's grip on her mug was very careful. "The debt," Renzo continued, "it has been purchased and forgiven. There is no outstanding balance. There will be no certified mail arriving at your door." He held her gaze steadily. "And Kit has a confirmed appointment at Mass General's endocrinology department on Thursday morning. Dr. Vasquez's records will transfer automatically. He'll have a full care team going forward, not just quarterly visits, a complete program." The mug made a small sound against the table. She set it down. She had not cried in front of another person in 2 years. She had trained the reflex out of herself because crying in front of Cole had become something he referenced afterward, held up as evidence of her instability, her drama, the ways she was too much to deal with. She had become very disciplined about it. The tears that came now were entirely outside her control. Not dramatic tears, not gasping or shaking. Just water, quiet and steady, moving down her face in the particular way of something held back for a very long time. She stood up. She walked around the table. Renzo stood to meet her. He was a full head taller, and he stood with the contained stillness of a man who understood that the wrong movement in a fragile moment could break what was forming between them. Prue placed both palms flat against his chest. She could feel the solid, deliberate rhythm of his heart beneath her hands. "Why?" Her voice was even, but only just. "Bridget is safe. You could have stopped there. Why, Kit? Why all of it?" Renzo looked down at her. The controlled, predatory surface that his face wore in every other context was entirely absent. What remained was something older and more honest, a kind of recognition, the expression of someone who has spent a long time being powerful and alone and has not allowed himself to examine the cost of that combination until this particular morning, in this particular kitchen, with this particular woman standing in front of him. Because you knelt beside an old woman who was frightened, he said, and you talked to her about October and the harbor and books she might want to read. You held her hand until someone came. His voice was low and entirely level. You didn't do it because you knew who she was. You did it because it was right. A pause. And then you went back to a man who grabbed you by the hair in a public lobby. He held her gaze. I don't leave things like that unresolved. Prue looked up at him for a long moment. I'm 23 years old, she said. I work dinner shifts at a steakhouse, and I'm 2 semesters from finishing a degree I've been putting off for 3 years. I am not remotely equipped for whatever your life actually is. No, Renzo agreed, you're not. And you're telling me anyway. I'm telling you anyway. The rain had started again outside, the soft, persistent Boston rain that felt less like weather and more like the city arriving at a conclusion. She could hear it against the kitchen window, and she could hear Kit's game starting up somewhere upstairs, and she could feel Renzo's heartbeat, steady and unhurried, beneath her palms. She thought about the woman she had been becoming, smaller every month, quieter, compressed into a shape that Cole found manageable. She thought about the 2 years of stillness, the careful calculations, the mornings spent listening for his footsteps before she let herself exhale. She was done with that woman. She stepped closer, eliminating the remaining distance between them, and tilted her face up. Show me, she said. Renzo's hand came up, careful, unhurried, and cupped the side of her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone where the tears had tracked, gentle in the precise way that very strong people sometimes are, with the controlled awareness of their own strength. And then he kissed her. It was not a cautious kiss. It was the kind that answers a question that has been building in the air for days, decisive, certain, and absolute, the kind that doesn't leave room for misinterpretation. From upstairs came the small triumphant sound of Kit's game registering a win. Prue smiled against Renzo's mouth, and he exhaled, something that was unmistakably a laugh. Low and quiet and entirely genuine, the laugh of a man who had not expected to be here this morning, in this kitchen, holding this particular woman. Boston had a new arrangement, though the city didn't know it yet. A waitress from Alston and the most deliberate man in the Back Bay. A debt forgiven, a brother's future secured, and a woman who had remembered, in the space of 4 extraordinary days, that she was allowed to take up room in her own life. The gray cat finished her water on the windowsill and settled into a sphinx position, watching the rain with the imperious satisfaction of an animal that has never apologized for existing. If this story got you somewhere real, and I think you know exactly which part landed, hit that like button for everything Prue Langley deserved and finally got. Subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library so you're here for the next one, because I have stories waiting that will absolutely wreck you in the best way. And leave me a comment before you go. Do you think Prue made the right call staying, or would you have walked out those gates? I read every single one. See you in the next story.